All right, let's go ahead and take a look at your next set of notes, which is percents as equations. If we head to your document sorter here, learning goal wise, we are looking at learning goal number 54. Change colors here. I'll be able to use equations to solve problems involving percents. Okay, so we're on learning goal number 54. Okay. Percent equations. Let's go ahead and take a look at this lesson, and here we go. All right, now, first thing to be aware of, and a lot of you know this already, is that when we're translating percents, the word of is going to represent multiplication. The word is going to represent an equals symbol. You might see the word percent or the actual percent symbol. We can't represent and work with the percent as it sits, so you're always going to have to use either the decimal or fraction form, okay, when you're translating the percent. And then what is always going to be the variable, whatever that might be, okay? And we'll just use x as our sort of default variable. So they mentioned this note for percents. You cannot do math with percents. So how are we going to fix that problem? Well, we've already discussed that you need to change it to decimal form or put the percent in fraction form. Okay, so one of those two. So an example would be if you see 45%, we can move the decimal 2 spots to the left or divide by 100 and represent this as 0.45. Okay, fraction form, we never have to use fraction form unless we have a repeating decimal. Then we're forced to use a fraction. So for example, like 33 1/3%, if we move the decimal point over, we have 0.3, and this is just repeating, okay, because that's what 1/3 is. And we can't use that repeated decimal form, and so we would have to understand that 0.3 repeating is just 1/3. Okay, and so we'd have to use that fraction for this instead. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and check this out. I want you to get really fluent at this. Looking at our sort of hint words here, we have what is, and that's just typo. So what is 103% of this number? We already talked about that what is going to be our variable. So what is going to mean equal sign. And then we have of. So 103% is going to have to be, we talked about, it has to be represented as a decimal or fraction. So all I have to do is move the decimal place 2 spots to the left or divide by 100, and I have 1.03 times, because that's what of means, 127. Okay, we can just, the x is already isolated to the one side, so we're just doing 1.03 times 127, and we get 130.81. Okay, and so x equals 130.81. It says in the directions that we can round to the nearest tenth. And so instead of the 0.81, we're just leaving it 130.8. And so our answer is 130.8 is 103% of 127. And we know 100% is 127, so it makes sense that 103 would be a little bit more than that. Okay, so we're checking for reasonableness as we work. All right, next one. I'm looking at these hint words here. So we know this means equals, this means multiply, and this is my variable. And so all I have to do is plug it in now. So 102 is 94%. We have to change it to decimal form. So we have 0.94 of what? To isolate the variable, we're going to divide both sides by 0.94. And that creates one hole there, and so we're left with this nice little division problem of 102 divided by 0.94, and we end up with a very long decimal, but we're just rounding to the tenths place, and so we have 108.5 equals x. Okay, and that makes sense that 102 would be 94% of 108.5 because 94 is pretty close to 100%. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this next one. We have what percent, so here's my variable. Okay, I'm going to have to represent, pay attention to this percent as my variable here, of 55 is 24. Okay, so we have what percent of 55 equals 24. We want to isolate our variable, so instead of times 55, we're dividing by 55 to both sides. And we have x equals whatever 24 divided by 54 is. And we get, let's just double check that, 24 divided by 54, all right, is 0.4 repeating. Okay, so here's what I need you to remember is we are representing, this is currently in decimal form. There's no percent symbol, so we need to represent it as a percent. And so we're going to multiply by 100 by moving the decimal place 2 spots to the right. And that leaves me with x equals 44.4, and I still have to show that that is a repeating number, and that is now a percent. Okay, so 44.4 repeating percent of 55 is 24. Okay, all right, and that makes sense just because we know that half of 55 is 27.5. So it makes sense that a little under 50% is 24. Okay. All right, now the next ones we're going to have to use create an exact answer, not a rounded answer. And so we have some tricky fractions that we're going to have to deal with and things like that. So again, we're going to be referencing our fraction to decimal chart. And so I'm going to bring that out. This is something you're going to want to have handy until you really start to remember some of these fractions. But there are just some weird ones that you wouldn't be expected to remember. All right, we're going to follow the same routine. So I'm noticing these hint words of is and of, and what percent is my variable. And so I'm going to rewrite what we have here. 42 is what percent of 98. We're going to divide both sides by 98. And I end up with, let's see, what does x equal? 42 divided by 98. All right, we have this really long decimal here. But remember, we have to represent this with an exact answer. So let's really analyze this decimal. 0.42857142857142857. So I can hear the repetition when I read it. And so we have 428571, okay, is the repeating part. So I have 0.42857, and that's the part that's repeating. Now, again, you have to pay attention to when we say what percent, and that's the variable. We're in decimal form right now, and we need to go into percent form to answer this question. So those are ones that you have to really pay attention to. To go into decimal form, we're multiplying by 100 or moving the decimal place 2 spots to the right. This puts us at 42.8571. And don't forget, what would be after the 1? Okay, because we can't put a repeating bar into the whole number. And so you have to represent that in the decimal side. So 8571, after that would be a 4 and then a 2. And so this is the repeating part, equals X. And we have to remember that this is now representing the percent. And so there is our answer. And we could just put that down in the answer spot. But if you look over at our fraction decimal part at some of the really long ones here that are over 7, you can actually, do you see the one that has 0.857142 repeating? Yep, there it is, 6/7. So instead of that, we can go ahead and put 42 and 6/7%. Okay, so 42 is 42 and 6/7% of 98. And 42 is close to half of 98, and so that percentage makes sense. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. We're not going to be able to, number one, work in percent form. We have to change that to a decimal. And to do that, I have to also get rid of this 2/3. Okay, so if you don't remember what 2/3 is, you could always just type in 2 divided by 3, and you can see it's 0.6 repeating. And so at this moment, I have 16 and 2/6. Or I have 16.6 repeating. This is still a percent. I haven't changed this to decimal form yet. Okay, it's still percent form. And then we can go ahead and change it to decimal form by moving 2 spots to the left or dividing by 100. Okay, this puts me at 0.16 with that 6 repeating. Okay, let's go ahead and look and see if we can find a 0.16 with the 6 repeating. There we go. Take a look. See? And so this, because we can't do work with repeating decimals, we have to change it to fractional form. Okay, it's something that we talked about up here. If you ever get a repeating decimal, you have to use fraction form. Okay, and so our 0.16, this is actually 1/6 as a fraction, and now we can go ahead and plug in our stuff. So we have 1/6 of 126 is what? So of 126 is what, and what is our variable? Okay, and now we know just by multiplying straight across that this would be 126 divided by 6. So let's go ahead and see what that would be. And it turns out to be 21 equals X. Okay, and so they're saying that 16% of 126 is 21. Okay. All right, let's go ahead to your last one. It says 45 is, so let's look at our hints here. 55 and 5/9% of what? Okay. We need to change this percent to a decimal. Okay. And so we have to know what 5/9 is. And we've worked with this in another notes page, but let's go ahead and look at 5/9. 5/9 is 0.5 repeating. So right now we have 55.5 repeating. This is still a percent. Always remember, if you haven't moved the decimal, you're still in that percent form. So let's go ahead and move the decimal now, 1, 2 to the left, and we have 0.5 repeating. Well, do you remember what 0.5 repeating is? 0.5 repeating was 5/9. So really, we have 0.5 repeating, but this as a fraction, because we can't work with a repeating decimal, is 5/9. So let's go ahead and fill out our equation now. 45 is 5/9 of what? Okay, if I want to isolate the variable, something times 5/9, to get rid of that, we would divide 5/9. Now, we don't divide by fractions, do we? We, do you remember that word? Multiply by the reciprocal. And so we're going to multiply by 9/5. Okay. And when we do this, I can go ahead and cross simplify here. Okay, so we have 1 in the denominator. 45 divided by 5 is 9. And so now just multiplying straight across, we have 9 times 9 which means 81 equals x. Okay, and so our final answer is that 45 is 55 and 5/9% of 81. And so think about that. That's pretty close to 50%, and 50% of 81 would be 40.5. So this is reasonable and makes sense. Okay. All right, that is your lesson on using an equation to solve decimal problems. Okay, so really focus on those translating words. Those are the key to working this out.